HMYOI, Wetherby is where the future of some of Britain's most vulnerable children goes to die quietly behind concrete walls. On paper, it's a youth justice facility designed for rehabilitation. In practice, it's a warehouse for trauma, a space where children are left to rot in their cells for days, denied education, care, and in some cases, even daylight. And if you think that's an exaggeration, consider this. Inspectors found kids hadn't left their cells for 5 days straight, not once. No fresh air, no education, no human contact beyond meals slid through a hatch. The independent review of progress from 2024 does not offer hope. It offers a report card soaked in shame. Across the board, the place is failing. It's failing to keep children safe. It's failing to provide meaningful activity. It's failing to give them even the illusion of care. The entire institution is functioning like a last resort dumping ground for kids that the system has no plan for and doesn't want to talk about. For years, the prison tried to accommodate girls in a building designed for boys, and the results were catastrophic. Rates of self-harm among female children were so astronomically high that even the most hardened officials had to backtrack. Girls were over 100 times more likely to self-harm than boys, over 20 times more likely to be restrained. In 1 year alone, more than 70% of all self-harm incidents in the prison came from just a handful of young girls. They've now been removed from the site, but not because the institution evolved. They were removed because the institution had no clue what it was doing, and the damage was already done. Boys still suffer. In one of the most brutal sections of the report, inspectors revealed that over 130 children were separated in 2023, amounting to 264 recorded cases. Children who, often out of fear, mental health crisis, or sheer institutional neglect, remained confined in isolation. The prison calls it separation. Let's call it what it is: solitary confinement for minors. Some were so afraid to leave their cells, they simply stopped trying. One boy hadn't seen daylight in 5 days. Others missed education, family contact, counseling, everything. Separation is supposed to be monitored. Instead, it has become an unofficial behavioral management tool. Violent restraint and strip searches still plague the institution. The official numbers may be lower than last year, but the reality is that children are still being forcibly stripped, still being held down, still being hurt. At least 11 strip searches were conducted under restraint in 6 months, and at least one of those was without proper authorization. Pain-inducing techniques are still in use. Force is still being used for non-compliance, which is code for institutional frustration, not immediate threat. The body-worn cameras that are supposed to protect children and hold staff accountable, often not switched on. And when they are, the footage gets reviewed through a lens of policy, not trauma. In one reviewed incident, inspectors watched a child being insulted, mocked, and mishandled, and no internal red flags were raised. There's supposed to be a core program in youth custody called CUSP, Custody Support Planning, a lifeline where each child is given a named officer who builds a bond, tracks goals, supports progress. It's the backbone of rehabilitative youth justice. At Wetherby, it's barely functioning. Less than half of scheduled sessions even took place. Some kids didn't know who their key worker was. Some hadn't seen them in months. A tick-box system, managed by exhausted and disengaged staff, has become a farce. When children in custody don't feel like they have anyone to turn to, the system has failed in its most basic human duty. Even the cells reflect the neglect. Refurbishments have begun on a few wings, but most children remain in cold, decrepit units with no temperature control, graffiti on every surface, and decaying furnishings. The contrast is grotesque. In one cell, newly painted walls and a functioning sink. In another, broken vents and damp mattresses. The heating controls don't work, the lights flicker, and the toilet sits exposed in the corner. A daily reminder of what little dignity is afforded to the child who sleeps beside it. The daily regime is utterly broken. Children should be out of their cells, engaged in meaningful activities, sports, education. Instead, many are locked up for over 22 hours a day. On weekends, up to 1/3 of all boys spent less than 2 hours out of their cells. Some didn't leave their cells at all. This isn't rehabilitation, its containment, its psychological suffocation. Education is a disgrace. Not one single child passed GCSE English or maths, not one. The maths department has seen teachers come and go like a revolving door. There is no consistency, no engagement, no future. Construction courses are unavailable because of staffing issues. Hospitality, once a pathway to real-world employment, sits empty. Too many lessons are cancelled. The children know it, the staff know it, and the inspectors had no choice but to say the obvious. Education here is failing. Healthcare isn't much better. Mental health support is stretched thin. Children with severe trauma, behavioural disorders, or suicidal thoughts are left waiting for assessments. In some cases, they are put on basic regimes that isolate them further. Staff are burnt out, case reviews are delayed, and if a child is deemed too high risk for this institution, they wait, sometimes for months. In the meantime, they're segregated and forgotten. The only thing worse than a child in crisis is a child in crisis ignored. The culture among staff is inconsistent. Some genuinely care. Others are just surviving shifts. Most are unsure what the policy is anymore. Leadership tells inspectors that plans are in place, but plans don't hold broken boys at 2 a.m. when they're screaming into a mattress. Plans don't stop fists in the corridor or lift a boy out of the 5th restraint that week. This prison is good at creating paperwork. It is catastrophically bad at delivering care. The official progress ratings speak volumes. No good progress in any area. No meaningful progress on separation. No improvement in education, relationships, mental health, or resettlement. Just isolated sparks of reasonable progress on superficial policies. This is a system collapsing in slow motion, while officials reshuffle charts and hope nobody asks real questions. So let's ask them, why are children in the UK being held in conditions that would be illegal in many adult prisons? Why is it acceptable that boys in state custody are left alone in their cells for 5 days at a time? What are we telling these children about their worth, their future, their place in society? This isn't a rehabilitation centre, it's an engine for despair, and the longer it runs like this, the more children it will chew up and throw away. Ask yourself, if this is the best we can do for the most damaged children in our country, what does that say about who we are? Let us know your thoughts, because if this is how Britain treats its children behind bars, the real criminals may not be the ones locked inside. A vulnerable girl in a young offenders institution twice had her clothes removed under restraint by an all-male team of prison officers, a report says. The inmate had been stripped to stop her using her clothes to harm herself at Wetherby Young Offender Institution. The incident emerged in a report, external highly critical of the facility, which houses some of the UK's most complex children. Its author, Charlie Taylor, said care for vulnerable young people, especially girls, was not good enough. The Chief Inspector of Prisons said it costs nearly £250,000 a year to keep a child at Wetherby, adding, with outcomes like this, there has to be a real question over whether this is working. Inmates at Wetherby are between 15 and 18, and almost half have been in the care system during their lives. Some are beginning very long or life sentences. There are 7 girls imprisoned in England and Wales. When Wetherby was inspected in late 2023, 3 were held there, a small fraction of the institution's 165 inmates. Wetherby saw almost 900 incidents of self-harm in the space of a year, the highest of any prison in England and Wales, and more than half were accounted for by the 3 girls. The report found the extremely high levels of self-harm had led to very high levels of use of force and assaults on staff. It singled out the treatment of one particular girl who was using her clothes to make ligatures and was twice pinned down and forcibly stripped by male prison staff. Female staff did not attend the searches because they had been assaulted earlier in their shift. Mr. Taylor said the girl's predictable pattern of self-harm meant there was no excuse not to have female staff on hand, adding, the fact it happened twice is completely unacceptable. He painted a damning picture of how girls are managed by the prison system, particularly at Wetherby, after warning in his report there is no coherent plan about how they should be held. Children's Commissioner Dame Rachel D'Souza told BBC Radio 4's PM programme she did not think the treatment received by the girl at Wetherby was an isolated incident, although hopefully most of the YOIs, young offender institutions, normally have female staff on. I don't think this is a complete one-off, she said. This case should be the line in the sand where these girls are much better served by being in mental health wards or in secure children's homes, said Dame D'Souza. She said she had written to Justice Secretary Alex Chalk and to the Inspectorate to say, we really need to get girls out of these institutions. Asked whether they were suitable for young men, Dame D'Souza said, what most of the boys say to me is, I come in here and I learn how to be a criminal. If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this story, you can visit BBC Action Line. The Wetherby report found children held there spent too much time locked in their cells, received a poor standard of teaching, and were subjected to a high rate of pain-inducing restraint techniques. 24 children were strip-searched over 12 months, half of which were carried out forcibly. Pain-inducing techniques were used 9 times over the same period, and not a single incident was deemed appropriate by an independent review panel. Inspectors reviewed randomly selected body cam footage and identified an incident where a child had been injured while being restrained and senior leaders had not been told, the report revealed. Mr. Taylor credited the governor with making Wetherby more stable in recent years, and most children there described having a good relationship with staff. However, the report concluded its safety score had to be downgraded, particularly because of its care for girls. It described the insistence from leaders at Wetherby that they lack sufficient frontline managers to make progress on some key issues as scarcely credible, given it had 91 members of staff in senior positions. Mr. Taylor told the BBC Young Offender institutions are too top-heavy, with high numbers of middle managers and frontline officers on the ground, leaving because of high levels of violence. He said, there is no doubt these are difficult places to work, and called for real thinking on how to reduce violence in order to make youth justice more stable and sustainable. The report has prompted calls for reform of youth justice in England and Wales. Andrea Coomber of the Howard League for Penal Reform said, it is virtually impossible to imagine the damage caused to the girl who, made to live in a prison designed for boys, became so distressed to the point of wanting to harm herself, and was then forcibly stripped by a group of men, not once, but twice. It is appalling that the state's care for vulnerable children could sink to such depths. Campbell Robb, chief executive of the charity NACRO, said, a group of men forcibly stripping a distressed young girl, hurting and locking away children in cold cells is not how any child should be treated in a civilized society, whatever they have done in the past. The government must act immediately to improve the lives of these children and to lay out a comprehensive improvement plan across all of these institutions. A Ministry of Justice spokeswoman said custody should be the last resort for children who commit crime, and the number of girls in youth custody had decreased since 2015. This small number of girls have exceptionally complex needs and require specialized support, which is why HMYOI Wetherby is providing additional training to staff on self-harm and increasing opportunities for meaningful activity, education, and personal development, she said. Restraint is only used on children in rare circumstances when there is no alternative to prevent serious harm to the child, other children, or staff.